Deep in the Berkshire countryside sits one of Britain's most feared institutions.
My first impression was, this is a prison.
Broadmoor Hospital.
It's notorious because of who's there.
A place where dangerous men are sent when there's nowhere else for them to go.
You are dealing with people who carry a substantial risk of harm to the public.
There's always that risk that violence might erupt.
This is the inside story, told by those who've worked behind its walls.
One patient suddenly turned on me and said, the trouble with you is that you won't let me be mad.
Those once detained here.
My behaviour was psychotic. My voices were daring me to trust them.
And by the most notorious of all.
He called me Bob, and I called him Peter.
This is a call from Broadmoor Hospital.
Secretly recorded and speaking from beyond the grave.
But why binding, is he? We're not allowed that. They're paranoid about everything. You'll be surprised, you won't believe it here.
Some will never leave.
You're there until it's deemed fit that you could be released.
This is the story of how to get out of Broadmoor.
People have escaped from high secure units. It does happen, and it happened while I was there.
Broadmoor Hospital is one of the most secure institutions in Britain, home to over 200 men with mental illness or personality disorders. It is surrounded by dense woodland, 22-foot high walls, and cutting-edge CCTV cameras. But despite all the security, there's still one sound synonymous with Broadmoor: the escape siren.
If there was an escape, these sirens would wail, warning the local citizens that someone dangerous had left Broadmoor. They were tested every Monday morning at 10 a.m. and I think sent a terrible wave through the community and the local area, making it very aware that Broadmoor was there.
Breakouts from Broadmoor are incredibly rare, but escape is not impossible.
People have escaped from high secure units. It does happen, and it happened while I was there.
In July 1991, one of Broadmoor's most dangerous and depraved patients managed to escape.
It was in the morning, and I heard this noise, and I thought, oh, that's a siren.
I remember that siren. It was a wailing, whirring, god-awful noise.
As the escaped patient vanished into the woods, the surrounding village of Crowthorne went into lockdown.
Everybody locally were told to lock their doors. The kids, the doors all closed at the schools.
Schools in the area were closed and parents were told to keep their children off the streets.
With a violent offender on the run, staff members were expected to drop everything and report for duty.
Got in the car, drove to Broadmoor quite fast, went straight to where the reception's all set up. So maps came out from behind the walls so that the police and everybody knew the areas.
Masses and masses of telephones, maps, everything. It was like a huge war room, if you like. And there must have been 60 police cars in there from all over.
Police roadblocks, helicopters, the lot, the whole jamboree.
Nurses and police were sent out to search for the runaway patient.
And we were all put in teams, and you paired up with the police, and off you went.
But the search teams had their work cut out. The man on the loose was no ordinary patient. He was convicted child rapist James Saunders, also known as the Wolfman, because he'd lived in the wild whilst being hunted by police.
They called him the Wolfman because he went on the run and decided to live rough in the Wiltshire countryside. So you have this man who's been on the run. It creates a storm nationally and earned him the nickname of the Wolfman.
After 5 years and 7 months in Broadmoor for violent rape, Saunders was on the run, once again. Staff scrambled to work out how on earth he'd got away.
Evidence of Saunders' cleverness is that to distract attention from the fact that he was planning to escape, he helped to organise a pizza-making competition, which involved the chef and the staff in Broadmoor.
Neil Wheatcroft was Broadmoor's head chef at the time.
He was a wiry, muscly patient who, when I first met him, he said, would I be prepared to do a demonstration of pizza making? This was the initial meeting with him, and I said, yes, we can.
But the pizza party was just a diversion. With the staff preoccupied, Saunders made his escape.
And it's during this he used the time to slip away and exit through the shower room window. He'd stolen a hacksaw blade from the workshop.
He sawed through 3 window bars.
He's also tied bed sheets together so that he could go down to the ground.
And he would have dropped to the deck, ran across an open courtyard to the next wall, and then over into the woods and gone. Very clever.
I mean, it was extraordinary ability. And I'm not saying for a moment that he shouldn't be incarcerated, of course, but my goodness me, that was some achievement.
Saunders was strong, fast, and easily able to hide in the wild.
Hunting him is no easy matter. Broadmoor is bordered by dense, thick pine forests. All day, helicopters have been scouring the area, flying at treetop height whilst men on foot searched the undergrowth beneath.
A day and a half passed, with no sign of Saunders.
I've done 9-hour stints on the road, searching cars.
And then, a breakthrough. Around 40 hours after the alarm was raised, a member of the public spotted a man acting strangely in the woods outside the Somerset village of Crosscombe, almost 90 miles from Broadmoor. They called the police.
A neighbour apparently said something to a policeman, and then they sent the truck down to fetch him.
And he didn't put up a fight, particularly. He just acknowledged it, said, well, you've got me, and went back to Broadmoor.
Although Saunders had been recaptured, questions were raised as to how he had managed to saw through the window bars.
One of the things that we used to do for security purposes was we used to go into patients' rooms and we would rattle our keys along the bars. And if you heard a different sound from one of the bars, that was an indicator that it had been sawn through.
It's very complicated to escape from Broadmoor. It's a lot of locks to go through, a lot of guards to pass, a lot of security.
At Broadmoor, a patient escape is known as a never event, something that under no circumstances should be allowed to happen. So what happened next was doubly damaging.
And so a couple of years later, in 1993, the Wolfman decides to escape again.
He just took off like a roadrunner. Off he went and over the wall, gone.
Broadmoor had been rocked by the escape of child rapist James Saunders. The 40-hour manhunt caused a national scandal.
It was deeply wounding to Broadmoor that such a dangerous man should be allowed to escape.
But although he had been recaptured, the patient known as the Wolfman was undeterred.
Saunders wasn't content to remain in Broadmoor, and so a couple of years later, in 1993, the Wolfman decides to escape again.
This time, Saunders seized a chance opportunity.
He was escorted off the unit to go to a work area. So there was actually staff there. And he just took off like a roadrunner.
and he ran just full tilt, and then up a lamp and jumped from the lamp onto the 22-foot wall down the other side.
Off he went and over the wall, gone.
Remarkable, worthy of the circus.
My friend said, bloody hell, just gone over the wall. God, he's done it again.
Yet again, the siren sounded. Yet again, it proved that you could escape from Broadmoor if you were determined and if you were lucky.
But on this occasion, luck wasn't on his side.
When he landed on the other side, he did his ankle in.
Saunders was recaptured. But that was the last time those sirens were sounded in anger at Broadmoor. There was never another escape.
Things tightened up, they got more security, a lot more cameras were being installed outside.
The reality is it's very hard to escape from Broadmoor indeed.
As Saunders discovered, the only guaranteed way out of Broadmoor Hospital is to get officially discharged. And many patients do get out, the right way, like former patient Joshua, who made progress with his recovery and was allowed to leave after 7 years.
I remember someone said to me, the wall isn't just to keep people from escaping, it's so that people have safety in which to recover. So it's as much a protection to the patients as it is the public.
After making a series of violent threats, Joshua was sectioned and sent to Broadmoor Hospital in 2004.
I've been diagnosed with a psychopathic personality disorder with traits of narcissism, borderline, antisocial, and paranoid. It was a nightmare. My life was a car crash.
At Broadmoor, Joshua received much-needed treatment.
Since I was medicated, that really turned my life around. I didn't think about getting out for the first few years. I just threw that thought away and invested my time in the activities that were going on around me. And the result was that 7 years later I was moved out of here, and the rest is history.
Joshua was discharged from Broadmoor after a long programme of treatment, therapy and reflection.
Well, the medication addressed my mental illness. I started to relax, my thoughts started to slow down, I started to become more self-aware. It's recovery. That's the main point of Broadmoor, it's recovery.
Though Broadmoor might look like a prison, it is in fact a secure hospital, treating some of the country's most dangerous mental health patients.
We work as anyone else in psychiatry would work, with all the most modern treatments. It's just that we have security as well. So it's a proper modern hospital, but with security.
At Broadmoor, patients who have committed a crime are detained with a hospital order, a legal declaration that detains those criminals whose mental health makes them a risk to themselves or others. Unlike a prison sentence, a hospital order has no set end date, so patients must remain in Broadmoor for as long as doctors deem it necessary.
One of the extraordinary things about Broadmoor is that you aren't really sent for a determined term. You're there until it's deemed fit that you could be released.
This means that if you want to get discharged from Broadmoor, you'll have to follow a rigorous process of treatment and therapy.
The first stage in all of this is to get the mental illness under control, and so the person is without the symptoms that cause the problem in the first place. On top of that, you then want to make sure the person has insight into the past difficulties that they had, and that they have an understanding of some of the ways of dealing with the illness in the future if it were to return.
I started to realise that I've been carrying around all this baggage, this mental baggage for years, stuff that happened when I was in primary school, you know, age 12, and I'm still angry about it. And it made me realise that you've got to let go of this stuff. This is it's achieving nothing apart from facilitating your own breakdown.
So within Broadmoor, there are different levels of security on the wards, and you want to see someone progressing to the lowest level of supervision. So it's about gradually reducing the level of surveillance until you can reintroduce someone to the outside world.
If a patient has served out their criminal sentence and can demonstrate that their symptoms are under control, then even serial killers can be considered for discharge to the outside world. One such patient is Kenneth Erskine, more commonly known as the Stockwell Strangler.
They were the sort of people least able to defend themselves, the elderly, the sick and the frightened. They were the victims of a psychopath who roamed the streets at night for nearly 5 months, looking for pensioners who he strangled to death and sexually abused.
In a period between April and July 1986, we know for certain that Erskine killed 7 times.
He deliberately targeted vulnerable old individuals.
He was 23, they were between 67 and 94.
They were people that he could exercise a level of control and power over.
This morning, police repeated their warning to elderly people to keep all doors and windows locked at night.
He would climb into the house through the window and attack the old person, often sexually. He would strangle them. He would sodomize them. It's impossible to imagine what that must have felt like to his victims, out of nowhere.
Fred Prentice was asleep in bed in an old folks' home when a man climbed in through a window and tried to strangle him.
He was just out of control. He wouldn't stop, indeed, until he was stopped.
When eventually caught and tried, 24-year-old Erskine was sentenced to 40 years, at the time the longest ever jail term handed down in Britain.
Sentenced in 1988, Erskine was initially sent to a high-security prison. Shortly after his conviction, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
During the trial, Erskine is reported to have behaved really quite inappropriately whilst in the dock. He was seen to be giggling and laughing and speaking to himself. And there was also a point where he was observed to be masturbating within the dock. That behaviour really is telling of somebody who is experiencing a mental illness.
Erskine was diagnosed with personality disorder as well as this chronic schizophrenia and goes to Broadmoor.
On arrival at Broadmoor, Erskine's symptoms were assessed.
Erskine would have been in quite an acute state of mental illness, so he would be extremely destabilised, really quite paranoid, mistrusting of the people around him. He talked about experiencing what's called command hallucinations. That commanded him to undertake certain actions, to do certain things. I think the key thing with his experience of psychosis is that he was completely out of touch with reality. So I think he would have presented as being quite challenging.
At Broadmoor, Erskine received therapeutic treatment.
Doctors will generally utilise evidence-based interventions such as cognitive behavioural therapy, schema therapy, dialectical behaviour therapy, and these are evidence-based therapies that we know that will impact mental illness.
Erskine's mental illness was also treated with medication.
In general, schizophrenia is responsive to medication. These are not just tranquilizers, they're very specific antipsychotic, anti-schizophrenic medications. And in 90% of cases of schizophrenia, they're going to produce an improvement, often a very dramatic improvement. Certainly my experience, if you remove from the picture the acute mental illness, give them some medication basically, the risk practically disappears.
You can't believe when they first came in, how they presented, how destructive, how aggressive to turn out, where you think, my gosh, they've gone through all that therapy and medication, and look at them now. It's just unbelievable, really, and that's what keeps you going as a nurse.
In order to be considered eligible for discharge from Broadmoor, a patient's entire clinical team has to be in agreement.
Everybody that's had input with that patient would have their say. A long, long process. And then once everybody in that team are satisfied, like they go to a tribunal.
Introduced in 1983, a mental health tribunal is an independent panel of experts who meet in a special tribunal suite to assess patients at Broadmoor. All patients, including Erskine, have the legal right for their detention under the Mental Health Act to be considered at a tribunal hearing once a year.
It's essentially a small court of law which considers whether the criteria for detention are still met. There's a judge, a medical member, and a lay member.
And they will read through your paperwork and your history, and they will make a determination whether or not you fit the bill.
The Mental Health Review Tribunal either says, yes, we're going to lift the hospital order and leave the restrictions in place, or no, we don't agree that this person is ready.
For Joshua, regular dialogues with his clinical team helped him keep his recovery on track.
I asked the consultant what he thought about what I needed to do, and they told me what I needed to do, and I went off and did it, and we worked through it systematically like that.
But every release from Broadmoor Hospital has its risks. And when things go wrong, the results can be deadly.
He games the system. He is indeed duly released from Broadmoor. Then he embarks on what can only be called a killing spree.
Broadmoor Hospital houses some of Britain's most violent criminals. So, it's no surprise that many patient discharges come under intense scrutiny.
Whenever somebody is discharged from hospital, it is on the balance of risks, really. You can never be certain of what's going to happen in the future.
There is a risk that violence might erupt again.
I'm not going to go out there and do anything that's remotely likely to get me locked up again. I've had enough of that, to be honest. I take my meds on a regular basis. I don't get involved in dangerous or dodgy habits. I don't take drugs anymore, for example. I don't associate with people who are likely to get me in trouble.
I think there's pressure in Broadmoor to make sure that any patient they discharged was completely safe. But human behaviour is so unpredictable.
If you release someone on the theory that they have been cured or rehabilitated and they proceed to kill again, then you are hanged by public opinion and by the media. And the most notable example of that, of course, is Graham Young.
In 1962, Graham Young was convicted of poisoning members of his family by slipping the dangerous chemical thallium into their tea. After being diagnosed with psychopathic traits, the teacup poisoner was sent to Broadmoor. He was just 14 years old.
He had taken a fascination with chemistry, and he started off by killing his stepmother and trying to kill his father and sister. In Broadmoor, he was rather a weird, creepy man, sort of remote figure, sort of on the periphery of everything. Nobody drank any tea that he prepared.
After just 2 years in Broadmoor, Young set his sights on freedom.
He's determined not to spend any longer in Broadmoor than he can help it. So he games the system. He was very, very capable of saying the right things, appealing to the authorities in the correct manner. I believe that he was thinking to himself, I can groom Broadmoor to my advantage. Convince the authorities that I am actually rehabilitated, regardless of what is in my mind.
In the 1960s, there were no mental health tribunals. Young only had to convince his psychiatrist that he was reformed.
The psychiatrist petitions the Home Secretary on his behalf, saying he's given up his mischievous interest in poisons and violence. The truth was rather different. I think he wrote a letter to his sister at one point saying, "Your friendly local Frankenstein is about to be released again." That is Graham Young, in a nutshell, your friendly local Frankenstein.
In 1971, just 9 years after his arrest, Young's wish was granted, and he was allowed to leave Broadmoor Hospital.
It appears that he was discharged prematurely by persuading his psychiatrist and the Broadmoor authorities that he was fully reformed, he was only a young man, so he was discharged. They helped him to get a job in a photo development shop.
He has access to poisons, including thallium.
Within just weeks, Young began poisoning his colleagues in his trademark manner by lacing their tea with thallium.
He embarks on what can only be called a killing spree. He's not only tried to kill his own family, but now he's killing random people he works with.
One by one, Young's colleagues began to fall ill. Many were hospitalized. The police began an investigation, and the teacup poisoner couldn't resist the limelight.
He took great delight in going to the police press conferences about the number of people who were becoming sick in his workplace. And he showed an abnormal interest, so much so that the police picked up on him quite quickly. And then when they checked on his background, they found out that he'd been in Broadmoor for poisoning and had recently been released.
By the time Young was caught, 2 of his colleagues were dead and several more were critically ill.
When Young is rearrested in November 1971, he's attempted to poison no fewer than 70 people. He has thallium in his pocket. He has a diary, which he notes exactly what doses is given to whom.
So, of course, he was arrested and convicted and returned to prison.
The revelation
So you can never say how it used to be. Oh yeah. Show you till you're through with me. I wanna keep it how it is, so you can never say how it used to be. Loving you is really all that's on my mind, and I can't help but to think about it day and night. I wanna make that body rock, sit back and watch. Tonight I'm gonna dance for you. Oh, tonight I'm gonna dance for you. Oh, tonight I'm gonna put my body on your body. Boy, I like it when you watch me. Tonight is going down. I'm rocking on my babe, rocking on my babe. Swirling on my babe, swirling on my babe. Baby, let me put my body on your body. Promise not to tell nobody, cause it's about to go down. You'll never need to, cause I will be your number one.
about Young caused a national outcry.
I think Broadmoor was hugely damaged by Graham Young's release. He's incarcerated for one set of crimes, is released, and then does exactly the same thing all over again.
The Graham Young discharge led to public inquiry as to how he could be released and then kill again.
I doubt if any country in the world could produce a better record than our doctors in Broadmoor. But the best doctor in the world can occasionally make a mistake.
That's where the tribunal can come in handy, really, because if there's a serious difference of opinion, a judge, an independent doctor, and a social worker can take a look at both sides and decide.
The Young inquiry led to the reform of the psychiatric hospital system nationally, and eventually the introduction of high, medium, and low secure psychiatric units. Today, these units form a vital part of the discharge process for every patient. No one goes straight from Broadmoor to the outside world.
Young was probably the most chilling and the most compulsive serial killer we've created in this country. I don't think he could stop poisoning. I think he would have gone on as long as he could get away with it.
Graham Young's psychopathy meant that he was able to come across as calm, sane, and rational. This helped him fool his Broadmoor psychiatrist.
Psychopaths don't appear, on the face of it, to be mentally unwell.
They can plan, they can organise, they can think rationally.
They display very charming behaviour because they knew that that's what was required. So they were able to manipulate, particularly their psychiatrists, because that person held the key to them being discharged.
The challenge for Broadmoor's doctors becomes even more acute when a patient has been convicted of violent, notorious crimes.
With the people who've committed very serious and particularly high-profile offences, you are playing with quite high stakes in this.
And the stakes don't get much higher than with the Stockwell Strangler. After 21 years at Broadmoor, in 2009, Erskine appealed his conviction.
The Court of Appeals reduced the murder conviction to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Appeal judges heard new medical evidence proving Erskine had been suffering from severe schizophrenia at the time of the killings.
With his conviction reduced, Erskine's future was now largely in the hands of his Broadmoor doctors. But should a man guilty of 7 killings ever be set free?
So Erskine would have to really demonstrate compliance with treatment and that medication. He would have to demonstrate an insight into his violent offending and the factors that led to that and contributed towards that.
7 killings. I mean, a man who clearly suffers from some kind of disease. I think it's a very difficult thing to decide what you should do with someone like Kenneth Erskine. I hesitate to say lock them up, throw away the key, but I am profoundly cautious about releasing someone like Erskine so that they may soon taste freedom, because I fear that they may commit the same crimes again.
But Erskine has appeared to be making progress with his recovery. In 2016, he was transferred from Broadmoor to Thornford Park, a nearby medium secure unit.
I think it can be difficult for people to understand sometimes that somebody who's done something really horrendous can ever be safely discharged into the community. But once you give them some medication, get the illness under control, you're often left with someone who actually presents very little, if any, risk to anybody. And it's very important to recognise that in those circumstances.
Now, one of Britain's most prolific serial killers is reportedly eligible for day release.
It's a very interesting arc for this extraordinarily violent, vicious man to go through a period of rehabilitation with the help of Broadmoor. I think the fact that Erskine is now in a lower security environment is to some extent a reflection of Broadmoor's success. Probably they regard it as a success. I suppose it gives you hope.
It's important to know that there's always a chance. No matter what they've done, it's really important. There's always a chance that in the future they will be able to be released. There will be freedom for them in the capacity that they can feel that actually they can go the other side of the wall.
The mission of Broadmoor is to exercise and practice therapy so that people can get better. The patient is going to be back out in society, living with us as our neighbors. Shouldn't we invest everything so that they are restored in some way so that we can continue to live in harmony?
That's a challenge to start looking at bringing somebody back out into society, because you're there to protect the society as well, protect the public. That's a duty of care.
But there's the crux of the debate. The public want to be protected. They do not see Broadmoor's role as rehabilitation. They say we just simply don't want those dreadful, dangerous men anywhere on the streets. It's a conflict. And Erskine precisely captures the conflict.
Whether Kenneth Erskine will ever be completely free remains to be seen. But one of Broadmoor's most infamous residents was content to stay there forever.
Ronnie Kray, in many ways, Broadmoor was probably the ideal place for him.
He was content in Broadmoor. He had everything he wanted.
I think one of the Krays once called it Kushti.
The majority of patients released from Broadmoor Hospital pose little threat to the British public. But no patient goes straight from Broadmoor to the outside world. They are first sent to medium secure units outside the hospital.
It's a gradual lowering of security and gradual increase of responsibilities and freedom. You do more to take care of yourself. You're not so dependent on staff.
Patients in medium security are granted access to certain privileges.
The kitchen was open, the knives were in the drawers, the laundry was open, the phone was open. Big difference in the way you feel about your surroundings.
The security is always there, but relaxed. A lot more relaxed.
The move from Broadmoor to a medium secure unit can be a momentous day for both patients and staff.
I felt good about the ones I'd helped get to that stage. And you get a shake of your hand and say, thanks for looking after me, and you think, yeah, okay, it's been worth it.
The best thing for myself personally as a nurse, the fact that you do see a day coming where somebody eventually gets transferred, it just gives me so much joy to see somebody leaving and they've got a whole life out there to live.
But life after Broadmoor can be difficult. After years inside, the outside world can be a disorientating place.
They haven't seen a car for 10 years, haven't been to the pub, haven't been out for a meal or a walk in the park. It's so different for them, you know?
Once transferred to a medium secure unit, escorted trips are an option, but they can be challenging.
My first escorted town leave was to a local market town, and it was a Saturday morning, and I got out the car and there were swarms of people about, and I felt very self-conscious, and I said to the member of staff, can we walk up there? And he said, yeah, sure. So we've walked up into an old country lane, and we've walked about, I don't know, 15 minutes, and I said, oh yeah, I feel better now, let's go back. And it was short and sweet, but it was a big step, because that, had it have gone wrong, it could have impeded my progress.
Even fully discharged patients remain in contact with Broadmoor staff, staying in touch in case any problems arise.
People would be discharged, and it would be part of my job to supervise them in the community. They couldn't just go out to the shops. They couldn't form normal social relationships like the rest of us could. You'd hear examples of people in their own flat looking around for somebody to ask for permission to go to the toilet. Really institutionalized and very, very difficult to adapt. When I was at Broadmoor, one of the patients who was being prepared for discharge was taken out to Reading on a shopping trip on a train. During the journey, he was very anxious and very agitated. And at one point, he stood up on the train and fell over. The train was moving so fast, he'd never been used to such speed.
You very quickly get adjusted to new circumstances. I adjusted to time in hospital, and I've adjusted to time out of hospital. If it all goes pear-shaped, I could be hoiked back. So I'm quite intent on making sure nothing goes wrong.
For some patients, the prospect of living an independent life outside Broadmoor is too much to handle.
There is a minority of people who don't have families who looked upon us as part of the family. There was one lady who was finally discharged, and she was banging on the gates to come back in. Well, that says a lot, really, doesn't it?
Not all patients get discharged from Broadmoor. In fact, not all patients want to be discharged. Sometimes patients and staff come to recognise that Broadmoor is simply their final home.
Ronnie Kray there's no question about it. In many ways, Broadmoor was probably the ideal place for him.
Convicted of murder, the East End gangster Ronnie Kray was sent to Broadmoor in 1979 after being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Ronnie Kray was not entirely sane. He was by far the most dangerous of the two twin brothers, and he was very much a loose cannon.
Kray's friend, Maureen Flanagan, made regular visits to Broadmoor.
He had his black moods where he told me when he first woke up in the morning and knew it was going to be a bad day, he thought he was going down a tunnel. And at the end of it was bloodshed.
Once hospitalised, Kray's schizophrenia was treated with medication.
He started freaking out and he felt he wanted to attack. And that's what had to be subdued in Broadmoor and regulated. And it was. He's been injected many times and sedated. They call it the liquid cosh, and sometimes it takes him days to get over that.
Over time, the gangster's fearsome persona diminished. Author Bernard O'Mahony recalls meeting Kray in Broadmoor for the first time.
I went into the visiting room. I was looking for a really big guy, jet black hair, inky black eyes. And this little guy in his immaculate suit sort of waved at me, you know. I thought, that can't be him. He was like a little old man, do you know what I mean? He wasn't intimidating to me at all, but I think he was quite happy where he was, to be honest.
Well, he knew exactly what was wrong with him, and he knew he'd never come out.
When Maureen organised a petition to try and get the Kray twins released, Ronnie intervened.
He said, take my name off of the petition. I went round to the East End, I got 10,000 signatures. He said, take it off, I'm never going to leave.
There is no doubt, too, that some of the criminal community regarded Broadmoor as a holiday camp, a soft option, a lovely place to go. I think one of the Krays once called it Kushti. But Broadmoor was the one place, I think, that Kray felt comfortable.
He became more calm, more happy. He was content in Broadmoor. He had everything he wanted. Number one, his room. His room became to look like his bedroom in his mother's house, with the little desk there, with his pictures, and the single bed here, and the rug on the floor, and the curtains. He played his opera. He loved to listen to Maria Callas.
I think he felt, I can make sense of this, and I can make a life for myself. He was a very notorious gangster indeed. But perhaps in Broadmoor he found an element of peace.
Peace, too, has descended on the Berkshire countryside. The Broadmoor sirens have been decommissioned and replaced with a high-tech text alert system. In 2019, the entire hospital was redeveloped, transforming Broadmoor into an institution fit for the 21st century.
The new hospital that is built is now right beside the old Broadmoor Hospital. Very modern, lovely conditions inside, activities, technology, completely different. All those things are very crucial to somebody who's going through mental health problems. Nobody chooses to have mental health issues. Who on earth would choose that? So I would say support them and take a minute, surely, just to stop and talk to somebody who you can see they're troubled. Are you okay? Do you need a hand? Or you look upset? What can we do for you?
The reason Broadmoor helped so much is because they treated me the right way. You know, so I see it's a very positive place. The proof of the pudding, as it were, is that I've been trouble-free, no arrests, no cautions. I mean, it helped me learn to respect myself, accept myself for who I am, helped me to get rid of all that negativity and start from scratch and start building a life that I can be satisfied with and a life that doesn't see me causing other people pain or doing myself injury. I do a lot of work in mental health now, and it's a way of giving back. Having received so much positivity from the system, I now go back as what they call an expert by experience, and that gives me a purpose. My life is completely different now. I've got my freedom back. I'm married. You know, I have good positive relationships with family and friends, and I'm content.